Redditors who haven't found the right place to post your story. What is it? When I was really young I would ask my dad if I was his real son because I was Asian and he was white. He would always tell me that he was my dad and I was his son. I wouldn't bring it up too often, but for some reason the thought just itched at the back of my mind. Fast forward to my first year at college. I meet my biological mother and she tells me that my dad isn't my biological father and that I was actually the son of one of my dad's friends from the Navy. My dad didn't find out until I was around 5 and afterward he decided to raise me in spite of my mother cheating on him. That means you really are his real son and he is your real dad. Once my sister lost the lunch check she was supposed to turn into the office at school. Later that day, she found another girl's lunch check on the ground and decided to do a good deed and turn it into the office for her. When my sister got to the office though, the girl whose check she had found was there, too, turning in my sister's check that she found on the ground earlier that day. The saddest thing I have ever witnessed was a mother's tearful rendition of You Are My Sunshine. This was at the funeral of her 16-year-old son, who had hanged himself in his room a few weeks after Christmas. This was made even more sad by the fact that she had previously lost a child to sudden infant death syndrome. My husband is a high school football coach and the first game of the season is tomorrow. He has already been offered money, sexual favors, and free yard work from parents as long as he starts their kid. He isn't even the head coach. Our oldest son is on the team and my husband likes to point out that our son doesn't always start either. I really hate parents. It is high school. Time to cut the cord. If your kid isn't good, they likely won't be on the field much. I work in retail sales selling pretty common technology. You meet all sorts of people. People who are weird, people who are cool, people who are buttholes. I've made friends with my customers a few times, although I usually keep everything on my work phone. No Facebook messages or hangouts. I have grown up in and currently work in Texas. A wonderful place. I met a nice older lady at work, who I'll call Mrs. Texas. She was always decked out. Texas purse, Texas boots, Texas nails. She bought a tech somewhere else, and like most her age, had a billion questions. She got sold something that's pretty crappy, and got tired of the people who ripped her off. Mrs. Texas came to my store and I started helping her out. I'd say probably once a month for about a year. She'd come in and I'd need to fix what she had. Nothing too major, just reorganization things and telling her everything's good to go. We would chat a little bit. One time, her text suddenly reset in my hands. I felt guilty, although I knew I did nothing wrong. She lost pictures of her dog that had just passed. Most people would cut me apart and I would have to kick out for things like this. She was upset, but not at me. Great freaking lady. She started having a few surgeries on her eyes. They didn't heal at all. It really stressed her out and slowed her down. The last time I saw her in the store she couldn't barely see. 2 days ago, I got a phone call from Mrs. Texas. She said it was important and asked me to call her back. Hey, usually frick customers and their tech questions once I'm off, but I called her anyways. Mrs. Texas explained that she had recently fallen and broken her arm. After sitting in the hospital for some time, her liver and kidneys gave out. She lost a ton of weight and knew her time was coming. The conversation was weird, but she was so calm. She told me she was going to die soon and wanted to thank me for being such a nice guy. Mrs. Texas called me on her freaking deathbed to thank me for simply doing my job. I bought her some flowers and went to her house today, talked for a while, and said goodbye. She was as happy as someone who knew their time was coming could be. Mrs. Texas will probably pass soon. I've said my goodbyes and thanked her for blessing my life. I'm a preschool teacher. One of my students sheepishly asked me if it was okay to ask me a question. I, of course, assured her she can always ask me anything on her mind. She then says, only mamas can say mother sucker, right? Yes, only mamas can refute. I'm not mama. I frequently walk my dog at a ravine near my house in Toronto. On more than one occasion, a Chinese tour bus has pulled up and flooded the ravine with old Asian women who proceed to take pictures of me and my dog. Sometimes when I'm feeling down, I just think that somewhere I'm in some old Asian woman slideshow. I smuggled 2 illegal workers out of my job and drove them to the airport and bought them plane tickets so they could get back home. The job was at a summer camp and they lived in the staff house on the property and didn't have cars in the US, so they were just stuck there all day every day being abused and overworked, and one day they broke down and I was like, alright, let's do this. I got fired the next day. My grandmother was murdered by her caregiver on the 17th of June 2016. The caregiver hit her in the head with a hammer, dismembered her, put her body parts in trash bags, drove them about 2 hours across the state line and dumped them in the middle of the night. She burned all of her bedding, her purse, and tried to set some of the body parts on fire. On the 21st of June 2016, the detectives interrogated the caregiver with evidence they had collected. She gave a partial confession and told them where the body was. My mom is really struggling. I am going on vacation for 2 weeks leaving Sunday, which has been a planned trip for a while. We're leaving the country. I feel guilty because my mom is struggling and I'm excited about vacation. I feel guilty that I'm not struggling with everything the same way my mom is. I could write for an hour and still not give you all the details of the crazy stuff that happened with my grandmother's murder, or process all of my feelings. One time I ate 26 chocolate chip cookies because I was mad at my little sister and didn't want her to have any. I puked all over the place. PSSH. Amateur. I was pretty much a toddler at the time. My parents had bought a brand new inflatable boat for a few $100s. They had fully inflated the boat and were testing it out in the backyard. While they were sitting in it, I went to the kitchen, grabbed the knife, went back into the backyard and stabbed the boat right in front of them. My dad went berserk. I just came back home after 6 weeks to discover that at some point during that time the breakers tripped and the house was without electricity for a long time. You can imagine what happened to the freezer, but you probably can't imagine the smell. I am not looking forward to cleaning it up tomorrow. One time I went to Maine and lobsters were only $3, so I ate 5 of them and puked all over the lawn. God bless America. While working my campus job, I once had a girl try to crap out the window of a moving van and it was still during training. My trainer just said, "Frick this, not again." I had this janitor in middle school. When I think about it now, he was severely autistic. I thought he was a teen who works for the school. Turned out he was almost 40 at the time. All the faculty and students treated him as kid and always praised how he was the best at his job. Cleaning spills and taking kids to the toilet, helping get papers around. He once saw me steal chalk out of the teacher's lounge. I'm talking about when I was 10. I remember his face. He was conflicted. He was upset, but he never told any of the teachers. The next day he comes up to me. I get super scared thinking he's gonna rat me out. He gives me 3 full pieces of chalk, unlike the broken scraps I was nicking from the lounge, and walks away without saying anything. I made it a point to say hi every day. He never really replied and I remember he had difficulty with eye contact, but he would always have chalk. Loved the dude. When I was in 3rd grade, I was chilling in the bathroom. A kid walks in and pulls out a pack of gum. I said, "Can I have a piece?" He said, "Sure." Another kid named Preston walks from behind and asked the same thing to the gum kid. The gum kid said that was his last piece. Preston turns to me and offered me $1 for my piece. I weighed out my options, deciding to give the gum to Preston. The next day I see Preston. I say, "Hey, did you bring my $1?" He says no. The next day I come up to him and ask the same question. He says, "I'll bring it next week." I'm starting to get annoyed, getting angry at myself for giving him the gum. The next week comes. I ask again. He says, "In 4th grade." Now he thinks it's a freaking game. Little does he know I'm very persistent. Every couple days I would remind him. He would say the same thing in 4th grade. The first day of 4th grade I come and find him. I ask him again, "Where is my $1?" He bumps it up another year, saying 5th grade. Again I bug him every couple days. Now this went on for a couple years. In 6th grade, he said he would give it to me in junior high. In junior high he said he would give it to me in high school. In high school he said on graduation. Now I'm holding him to this. We will most likely never see each other after that, so it's then or never. 3 years later it's graduation day. 9 years since I gave him the gum. I got my diploma. Everything was going great, but in the back of my mind, I knew my actual goal for the day, get my freaking dollar. I walk through crowds of people, still can't find him. Just as I'm about to give up, I look over and Preston is standing there holding the dollar. My eyes light up. Finally, I got my dollar. I grab it, hold it in the air and yell. I gave him a hug and he told me, "Darl, that gum was freaking delicious," and we parted ways. I jumped off a moving train once, was hanging out with a friend and thought it'd be fun to climb on a train. Well, the train started moving and I'm still sitting in the side. I know I have to get off but I'm scared to jump, but speed keeps building. After maybe 30 seconds, it felt like an hour. I tell myself I have to get off or it'll just keep building speed. So I build my courage, spot a grassy patch ahead, and totally parkour dive off. Like, parallel with the ground, movie style dive. I land on my side, roll a crap ton of times and stand up. I immediately check myself for injuries, find none and search for my phone. It's lost, plus I heard it shatter. My friend runs up terrified. I went like a mile down the tracks. Well, it doesn't end there. We're walking back, I'm cut up and bloody when a police car showed up. The officer gets out, looks at me and says, "Son, did you jump off the train?" Long story short, someone saw me and reported me. He thought I was a runaway kid at first, found out I wasn't, told me I could be thrown in jail on multiple charges but let me off. I had to ride in an ambulance though to make sure I was fine, which I was. And to conclude, that's when I officially decided to become a paramedic. My semi-estranged father robbed 12 banks to pay off drug debts and get money for more H. I didn't find out about his drug use until I went to see him at the county jail the night he was arrested. It's been torture on me for 6 months waiting to hear how long he would be in prison. I was worried he wouldn't get out for 20 years, that I'd never have the chance to finally have a relationship with him. After 6 months in prison he is doing really well. He's functioning normally and is clean. He signed an extremely generous plea deal, lack of priors and a connection to a person who went to prison earlier, and he was prosecuted by the same prosecutor who understood the reasons why he did what he did, and will be out in a few years. We've talked regularly since he's been in, more than in my whole life. I even got to visit him for 2 whole hours a few months ago, so that weight has been lifted and I'll be able to visit him more. Most people don't get to remember the first time their dad tells them he loves them. I do. Through a videophone the night after he was arrested. A few years ago, me and my best friend decided to rent a John boat and go to a fairly new man-made lake and fish for the day. It was a fairly windy and chilly day that day, but we stayed there for several hours and the fishing was excellent. Our battery started dying on our trolling motor, so we decided to head back in. About halfway in we hear a very faint sound. It was very hard to make out due to the winds. We head in that general direction just to check things out, and it turns out 2 elderly gentlemen had fallen out of their boat. One was clinging to a tree and the other floating in the water. Now if you have never been in a 10 feet John boat with 2 hefty gentlemen, it isn't the most stable, and I had been wobbly every time I moved in the boat. But when we discovered the 2 men, I forgot all about the instability and was jumping from one boat to the other trying to pull these guys in a boat without hesitation. I pull the guy off the tree in his boat while my friend is trying to pull the other guy in our boat. We finally accomplished this featuring, but the guy that was floating went into an episode. Not sure exactly what happened, but his eyes rolled back and he was shaking. I asked the man I pulled up if he could make it back to shore and he replied yes, just help my friend. The next few minutes are really a blur, but what I recollect is I jumped back in our boat and start rowing. Our battery was all but dead. My friend is steering with what little juice we have left and I'm rowing as hard and fast as I can with a single paddle. We make it to shore and EMS arrived shortly after and administered CPR. They revived him shortly after, but ultimately a few days later he passed. I've never told the story only because I don't want to sound like I'm bragging about doing something I could only hope every other person would do. Also, it bothers me knowing we couldn't save both gentlemen. I started hearing voices in year 7, started drinking in year 8 to cope. Finally in year 10, 15 decided to get help and got diagnosed with schizophrenia. Dropped out of high school at the end of year 12 to try to manage my meds and health. I'm now attending college as I want to professionally produce music, scores and soundtracks, and I just got my first paycheck for some contract work for an ad agency. Things are looking much better now. I've lost two of my best friends to suicide. The first about 3 years ago, and the second last week. When I started using Reddit, I thought that the automatic upvote you got was a glitch that I was experiencing, so I made sure to fix it every time so no one thought I was being rude. I had a massive growth spurt just before high school. I've only ever met one girl taller than me. I'm 6 feet 6 inches, 2m tall. I was always super self-conscious about my size, especially because my home life built up a decent amount of muscle to go with the height. In my third year of high school, during lunch period, I hear a lot of angry shouting coming from behind me. I try to ignore it, but a couple seconds later, a guy jumps over the table, grabs a girl by the front of her shirt, and starts slamming the back of her head into the table right next to me. Without thinking, I pulled him off of her and, remembering a little from my crappy childhood karate classes, pinned his arm behind him and pushed him to the ground, holding him there with my knee between his shoulder blades, until security could come get him. We were both brought to the security office. Big school, 3,500 students, where he is taken away by the police. I'm silently panicking, since zero tolerance means I'm just as guilty in this as he is, and he's now sitting in a cop car. The head principal, whom I know decently well, as I was a huge nerd model student, comes in, takes the cuffs off, and tells me to go back to class. He thanks me for pulling the guy off the girl, and for not killing him. He was a good 18 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter than me. I still struggle with self-image problems, but at least I could do some good with my size. I found true love once. I was a troubled kid and I was temporarily made a ward of the state and put in a therapeutic long-term program. I lived in a dorm with 20 other girls give or take, and there were 5 dorms in the whole building. Mine was for aggressive behavior type females. There was a dorm for aggressive males, a dorm for co-eds who were more likely to harm themselves than others, a dorm for kids under 12 and a dorm for mentally challenged kids. I was put in a room with a girl that was considered the most challenging roommate to have out of all the other girls. Her name, changed here, was Ariel. She was severely schizophrenic and also mentally challenged. I watched as all the other girls on the unit were overly sweet to her, like it was a competition to see who could be nicest to the slow girl. However, would make fun of her or be mean to her when they grew tired of being sweet. Ariel was extremely violent as well. She once threw a textbook across a room and knocked a girl out with it. If she had to be restrained, it would take at least 3 adults to do it. Anyways, I was determined to show people that being nice to Ariel wasn't just for looks and that she could be treated like a human being. It was hard. One night she had a bout of hallucinations and began to become aggressive and call me a B and slap people. She frightened me and I understood there would be times where she would lose all ability to tell right from wrong, but it didn't let it stop me. I read to her at night. I listened to her sing. I helped her learn how to clean her room. I held her hand when she was lonely and I stood firmly when she attempted to push me around. I lived with her for 8 months and she went from being callous and harsh with me to telling me I was her best friend. Ariel will never be able to leave that place or live without a caregiver. But I was always due to leave at some point. Ariel taught me my first lessons in patience, understanding, and sacrifice. I remember the last time I saw her, I told her I would soon have to leave, and she held my hands and told me she loved me, and I loved her too. I still love her and I think there will never be a way to show someone the pain and struggle and joy and laughter that we endured together that formed our love. I'll never see her again, but I will always love her. You have been visited by the beautiful Squidward. Comment beautiful as Squidward so that your beauty excels that of others. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.